Hello and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we're joined by Ryan Stanley. Good afternoon, Ryan. Good morning, I should say, for you.
Good afternoon to you, and it is a good morning for me, Pete. Thank you for having me, man. Like I said earlier, looking forward to it all week.
Brilliant. So tell us, Ryan, who are you? What are you doing? Where are you from?
Yeah, Ryan Stanley. I am a 45-year-old man living in New Jersey, USA. I am the second oldest of 10. I am a father of 2, married for 14 years. I am also a certified professional coach, have been since 2009. I spent a lot of my career working with musicians and people in the music industry. But more specifically, in the past couple of years, I've been really kind of broadening my focus to work with anyone who's interested in really pushing to their potential, recognizing that they have more to their potential and haven't been able to reach it. I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a coach. I am a bit of an ADD serial entrepreneur. I love creating businesses. I truly believe that entrepreneurship is a form of art. I think a lot of people, when they think of artists, they think of, musicians and obviously sculptors and painters and all these different forms of popular art. And that the similarity there is, they are starting off with nothing. They're starting off with a lump of clay. They are starting off with a blank canvas. And I think entrepreneurship is the same way. You start off with an idea. You have a concept that you want to create out of nothing and put together the pieces to make sure that it is visible to others and so others can observe it. And it's also a space where both in your typical art forms, you are putting stuff out there for someone to see and judge potentially. And I think entrepreneurship is the same way. And so I love using my creativity towards entrepreneurship and helping others do the same.
I was going to say, let's go straight into this. What is your superpower then? Where do you shine?
My superpower, I think, is definitely my awareness of the now. The self-awareness and the standpoint of I've spent a lot of time choosing to be here now and to create awareness of the now so that I'm not fearful of the future or the past. And not that it doesn't ever come up, but my superpower is to help others recognize that in now, when you wake up in the morning, there is sunlight, there is gravity, there is oxygen, just so that you can exist today. And what are you doing with it? And are you spending it worried about what happened 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago? Are you spending it thinking about what someone else somewhere else thinks? Or are you choosing your time now to create the best version of yourself and to take advantage of this gift called life? I think my superpower is also to do that for myself as often as possible and to learn from the moments when I'm not doing that.
And what does fire in the belly mean to you?
What does fire in the belly mean to me? That's a great question. I think, initially when you think of fire, sometimes you can think of destruction, right? And it's almost like something that can ruin things. But I think at the same time, in the belly, as I'm literally thinking out loud, I think it means how can you stir up something that ignites your soul, something that can help you to take action, help you to decide who you want to be in the moment. I think a fire in the belly is something that can get you up in the morning. I think a fire in the belly is something that will keep you hungry, right, for more, and not necessarily in a place of lack, I think, but more in a place of determination and perseverance.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned hunger there. I mean, are you, and I'm going straight down the rabbit hole
Love
here,
it.
but that's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, are you typically pain driven, pleasure driven? Where do you get off?
Yeah, definitely pleasure driven. As a young person, as a coach, was always, actually, before I was a coach, I was a people pleaser, right? Just by nature. Being the second oldest of 10, I took care of my younger siblings quite a bit. And so I liked taking care of them. At one point in my career, I owned a daycare center with my father. And so a nurturing kind of a thing. And so I like to serve others. I like to be liked as a younger person. I like to be liked for serving others, right? There was some capacity that made me feel loved by giving others love. As I've matured, I've been able to shift that to just not really being concerned where I'm getting the love from because I can give it to myself. But so, my hunger is more for the ability to utilize my gifts, right? My hunger comes from, it's like, okay, again, I kind of touched on it, but, I'm not hungry like I'm starving and I'm in pain and I need to satiate this, otherwise I'm going to die. As more like, oh my gosh, like the table is set. Like Ernest Holmes, right? I don't know if you know it from Ernest Holmes, but he has a poem, and it's I'm trying to think what it's called, but it's all about. It just says listen, the the hearth has been swept. Welcome, you are here. Like, this is life. Like the table, the hearth has been swept. The table is set. There's wine sparkling. There's light shining in through the window. This is here for you. And so my hunger comes from the ability that I have the ability to have hunger, if that makes sense. Like my awareness that hunger is a blessing, right? To fulfill. So I'm definitely, it's a great question. I never really thought about it. I'm definitely pleasure served, I guess. I forget how you worded it, but.
Yeah, pain and pleasure, and it is interesting, because you mentioned you're obviously from a well, for Irish it's a fairly big family. For probably for America it's probably a huge family, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so number two. What's the spread in all your siblings then?
Yeah, number two, and it's an interesting dynamic. So it's when you first say that second oldest of 10, it seems like it's all just one big 10, and it's similar, it's close, but it is between two families. So my father and my mother had 6 kids, and then they got a divorce, and my father had 3 more with his wife, and my mother had 1 more with her second husband. And so I'm number 2. I am 45. My youngest sister, I believe, is like 21. And so she's just a recent graduate of college. So it's an interesting place to see. It's an interesting place to be because while you have siblings who are 20 years younger than you, I remember them being babies. In fact, I am that sister who I mentioned, her name is Shay, and I am her godfather as well as her older brother. You know what I mean? So it's like this place when you are 20 years older than your sibling, you don't really spend as much time with them growing up to be as part of life. Because when I was in my 20s, I was moving on to adulthood and career, etc. And so I wasn't spending as much time as I could have or would have with them. So I don't know them as well as I'd like to. And so I'm certainly closer to my siblings who are more closer to me in age than I am with some of my younger ones. But in any case, it is, when you do have blood, you do have connectivity. There's a piece of something that every time you see them, you recognize them as family.
Talk to us. I mean, when you were talking there previously about sort of where you are, and the word now is quite a common word, or a word that comes up strongly for you. Why is that so key, if I can ask?
Well, the truth is because it's all there is. I mean, literally there is only now, right now. I mean, it doesn't always feel like that. We believe based on our, time is kind of a construct, right? We feel like there's a history, we feel like there's a future, but it's really just one big now. And our past is a bunch of nows that we kind of remember. In fact, we actually don't even remember accurately. 99, I don't know if I'm making that number up, but most of the time we believe that the past, we kind of change it a little bit to meet our story, right? To meet our victim story, it could be whatever it is. And the future is typically just nows in the future that we are based on our past are predicting, right? Oh, well, it's going to be this way. And typically for so many of us, a fear-based place, they don't even realize it. But to your point, like the people who are motivated by pain, it's almost like, oh my gosh, if I don't do this, my future is going to be bad. But if we realize that now is all there is, and we can take a moment in any moment when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, to recognize like, okay, so who do I want to be right now? Because so much fear and anxiety that occurs in a lot of our lives comes from places of worry of the past or the future or what someone somewhere else is thinking. But really, I have a morning routine, which includes what I call my I am statements. And one of the I am statements is remember to remember. And I don't say the next part out loud, but remember to me means that there is only now. Like, this is it right here. Who do you want to be right in this moment? And in that moment, when you recognize that there is only now, no matter where you are or who you are, and you can create gratitude for the now, and you can create gratitude for life, and you can be here now. Like, there's really, once you start to do that more often, it becomes pretty awesome. Pretty awesome way to live, to be honest with you.
I'm struck already by the amount of reflection you have in terms of your own clarity. If that's what comes across, is that a fair
Sure. Well,
statement?
I mean, it's intentional, and so thank you. I mean, I'm glad that's reflected because that is my intention, right? My intention is to be self-aware as often as possible. And that's actually the interesting thing about being human. When you create an intention like that, like sometimes it feels, and by the way, this took 45 years, right? So it wasn't like this thing that I've always been this way and and with that, there's still so much for me to learn. And I have bad days and bad weeks and bad months. I mean, there's aspects of my life. And I also know that there's the now, right? So like the human part that kicks into gear, the physical parts, I can certainly say it feels to me like I'm affected by the seasons. Like I definitely, as it begins to get darker, I get a little bit more tired, or I'll have moments of where I'm not necessarily feeling like myself. And I have to be aware of that and ask myself more frequently, like, who do I want to be now? Right. But so, yeah, I mean, it is very intentional. It is I think a lot of it comes from being genuinely curious as to what my options are in any given moment. Instead of feeling like life is happening to me, I'm very aware that life is happening for me. And when we step into that, like, that's the game. When you recognize no matter what is going on or whatever has happened to you, whatever your story is, if you start to recognize that, again, I know I touched on it, but I open my eyes, there's gravity, there's oxygen, there's sunlight, there's water, there's all these things just so that I can be here now. That is literally happening for me. So if that's happening for me, then everything else is happening for me. And if I start to come from a place that life is happening for me, whatever it is, and even stress, and this is not belittling anybody's traumatic experience. I've certainly had my share, I promise you. But the moment that my life was changed, the moment that I took some of those traumatic experiences and said, how did this happen for me? Instead of why did this happen to me? And when you start coming from that place that this is happening for me, and you start stepping into it with gratitude and then curiosity, then that's when you start to understand that there's a path that is unfolding for you, and you have the opportunity to be a co-creator of that path.
That's interesting. I mean, and talk to us about co-creation then.
Yeah. So, listen, I mean, I didn't make me, right? So, I mean, there is a greater intelligence, whether you call it God, whether you call it the universe, whether you call it life, whatever, there's been hundreds of thousands of, and again, I'm making that number, but really more than most people think, religions over the lifespan of humanity, right? And so there is this thing that creates my heartbeat, that keeps my heart beating, right? That allows me to exist and my parents to exist, and all the things that go into everything that we see and feel, that takes the energy that we see and puts it into a form of matter that we see and feel. So that's the co-creator. And so that is the thing is saying, hey, listen, ask for something, think about something, create gratitude, whatever you're focusing your energy on, that's what I will give to you. And the problem is so many people come from a place of lack where they're thinking, what I don't have, and I'm not there yet, and I don't have this. And if I'm praying for it, I'm still praying for it from a place of lack often. Right? So it's like, oh, give it to me if it's your will, as opposed to, no, you are my will, right? Meaning I'm God in this sentence. Right? So you are my will. I've already given you everything. So your job is to tell me what you want and to create gratitude, create an energy of abundance that it's coming for you, and think about it and feel it as if you would, as opposed to thinking and feeling like it's not here yet. And so the co-creator, I think, is the science of life, if that makes sense. I'm just kind of making that up right now. But it is like this thing that organizes all the energy, and it organizes the stars and the moon and the sun and life and conversation and all the things we are. And really, when it comes down to it, we are made up of the same exact things that the sun and the stars and the moon are all made up of, right? We're all made up of energy and of atoms and like molecules and all this stuff. And so when we realize that's the truth, then the same amount of energy, right? Our thoughts are energy as well. They can be measured. There's brain waves, there's alpha waves, beta waves, whatever. Not the same amount of energy, but the same concept of energy that takes me to decide to move my finger is the same thing that makes the sun, like the planets go around the sun. And when we put that amount of power, from an unlimited, magnificent way of being, and we recognize that we are divine, we are creation of the divine, and we start stepping into that, then again takes it back to the now. It's like, oh my gosh, not only is there only now, and I have this gift of life, but I'm like a child of God. Like I am literally the most amazing thing that ever existed, which is everything. I am that, and I'm part of that. And so for me to not step into that and do something with it as often as possible is belittling that, in my opinion, or at least just doing it a disservice.
It's it's kind of amazing there that there's so well. I mean, okay. What's coming across there is you're very aware in terms of universal energy, in terms of the space of consciousness. Is that a fair?
In my opinion, that's my intention. Yeah,
Mm-hmm,
I mean,
mm-hmm.
I think about it often. That's probably a nice way to say it.
Yeah. Who are you? Who's your avatar now? Who are you here to serve at this time that you're aware of?
I am here to serve. That's a great question, Pete. Thank you. I would say I'm here to serve those who are maybe on the cusp of self-awareness. Those who realize that there's more to life, maybe those who are recognize that they've been listening to others or living life for someone else or believing some old stories that don't necessarily serve them. And they know that, but they haven't been able to put their finger on what it actually is that needs to be done. I think there are a lot of, in fact, I'm right now, I'm developing kind of a new podcast episode based on the concept that there are good guys and bad guys out there. And that's a judgment. And I have a whole nother concept and possibly we can get into of judgment versus curiosity. And so I don't really mean to be judgy in that sense, as much as it's more of a metaphor, like and a tool for self-awareness. There are a lot of bad guys out there who, and I'll let you decide who they are in your life, in your world, right? I'm not really labeling anybody in particular. But I will say that there are a lot of bad guys out there who are telling you to be fearful. And they're telling you that they might be able to help you or that you need help from somebody else. And there's a lot of good guys out there who are telling you that you don't need anybody else and you don't need to be fearful. And you have everything that you need within. And if you choose thoughts and emotions that serve you as often as possible, and you start creating gratitude, you create compassion, you create empathy, you create understanding intentionally as often as possible, and you start to understand your own journey is valid and you are exactly who you should be for every single second of life that you've lived up until this moment. And you have the power to create the life you want. You have to be patient often. And that's a big challenge. A lot of people don't have the patience necessary. They feel like they want it now and yesterday. And when it doesn't show up in 2 weeks, they're done and they just go back to their old way of being. So I feel like, I'm here to serve those who are looking for the good guys and are recognizing that they are the good guys as well.
It's interesting that you define good and bad. Why?
Because I think one serves humanity and one doesn't. I think, interestingly enough, I used to I had this other concept and I never really spoke about it. It's not like I didn't speak about it much. It's just across my mind every once in a while that like humans are kind of a cancer of the earth. Like here we are, we're multiplying, we're growing, we're kind of damaging it and we're taking it over and we're doing all these different things and we're fighting and we're all this craziness. And I really believed that up until recently. And it's not that I don't believe that that's a truth from a detached scientific standpoint. It's like here we are, that is physically what's happening. When you look at a cancer or any type of a thing that takes over any type of a body or a being, that's really what happens, right? It multiplies, it grows, it kind of destroys it, it takes it over. And more recently, I'm deciding that we are also the immune system for the earth and for life. And it's up to us to decide who we want to be in that space. And so maybe good and bad might be, that's one way to look at it, but cancer versus immune system, right? We can be that immune system that is traveling, that is covering the earth, that is multiplying, that is going out all over the place to make it a better place, to make love and compassion a thing, and to make communication and self-awareness a thing that serves the earth and serves the planet and serves humanity. So I think the good and the bad, that's a great question. And again, because I don't think, good and bad is a judgment, right? I mean, everybody, I know I already said it, but it is we are all exactly who we should be for every single second of life we've lived. And so my bad isn't going to be your bad or somebody else's bad, right? So that is a judgment based on my perspective. But I think it's, again, going back to there's people that will serve humanity and there's people that won't. Or their ways of being in the now will serve humanity as opposed to their ways of being. There's people who won't.
That's interesting because even I suppose your concept of now means your next now could be different to this now.
Always,
so,
and that's. Go ahead.
I was going to say just in terms of your value set, your belief set, everything else, which will change. Obviously in
Totally.
response to the environment.
And that's and that's the whole point, I guess, in that analogies is because even though I've been a cancer in the past, doesn't mean I can't be the immune system moving forward. And so your past doesn't equal your future. Your past has brought you to where you are now. And every lesson, if we recognize, and I am exactly who I'm supposed to be for the life I've led up until this moment, and I'm recognizing there's aspects of it that I don't want to be. I'm recognizing that there's things about that I don't want to be me. I have the future. I have the opportunity to change. So that's why I say maybe somebody's quote unquote bad now. And that's based on my perspective, but it doesn't mean they can't have an awakening. It doesn't mean they can't have a lesson. It doesn't mean they can't have a situation. So often, in fact, people will have a traumatic experience and that's what changes their life. And so I think there's an opportunity for some of us, and maybe that's going back to your question of who am I here to serve? Ideally, I'm here to serve those who don't want to wait for the traumatic experience to really see that life, every single moment of life is a gift. The other piece that comes to mind as I'm speaking is maybe I'm here to serve somebody now in the future, in the sense that what they're hearing today, maybe a bit and piece of it, so, okay, this guy, all right, he seems a little whatever, or you know, he's got a perspective that doesn't really match mine. But 3 years from now on your journey, something I said today will serve you. And you'll say, oh, like, you know what? I wasn't ready to hear that message or feel that message appropriate for where I was in life. But now I remember that this guy that I heard, I couldn't even tell you his name, but I heard him on a podcast somewhere and he said this thing, and that's what I'm feeling and that's what I'm experiencing now. And I understand that. And so I guess I'm here to serve whoever's listening in some capacity, right? Whoever path I come across, because again, it's all happening for them.
It's interesting, just picking up on something you said there, and it's something that I'm sort of trying to work through myself at the moment and sort of analyze it. Is there's a term, you know, from great overwhelm comes great change. And you talked about that in terms of, you know, maybe they don't need to go to that bottom space to be able to flip, you know, the contrast or whatever it
Sure.
is, you know, to see the dark, you got to see the light, you got to do all that, you know. So, but you're sort of saying, well, potentially try and catch them before they go dark, and then hopefully flip.
Yeah, so totally. And this is really something I've spent the past 7 or 8 months with a lot of time reading and listening to a guy named Dr. Joe Dispenza. Are you familiar with him at all? So really changed my life. Like I've been, you know, like I said, I've been a certified professional coach since 2009. I've kind of always been under, like, as an entrepreneur, I'm into self-development. I'm into personal growth. I'm, you know, into the journey as a coach, as being trained for a coach. I was actually the internal coach for one of the top coach training organizations in the world. And so I coached all their staff as well. And so I love helping people recognize their potential and reflecting back to them what their gifts are, right? And so this is kind of a long way for me to say that I've been kind of on my own journey of growth. And as I've learned to help others recognize their fears and their blocks and their limiting beliefs and things that keep them small, I've learned a lot about my own fears, blocks, and limiting beliefs, right? And I've been able to coach myself around that and decide who I want to be and ask myself more questions. And I would say I read Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, which is called he's got a couple, and I'll read them real quick because really I would recommend anybody who's interested in being a better version of themselves, check him out. One is called Being the Placebo, or no, You Are the Placebo. The second one is called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And then there's a third one called Becoming Supernatural. And in December of 2019, I read Becoming Supernatural. And with that, he recommends some meditations. He tells you how to do them, but he also has them as downloads that you can get from his website. And I've been doing them daily since December. And I honestly believe it's part of my path, and as everything is happening for me, like his work was a big part of that. And my meditations that I've done are a big part of preparing me for 2020 and all the craziness that has occurred this year and all the shifting that has happened. And, you know, it's been an interesting year for a lot of people. So I guess what I'm saying is I've definitely leveled up because of that. And all this goes back to, he speaks a lot about, hey, what if you didn't have to have the traumatic experience? What if you didn't have to have this dark before the light? And the way he talks about it is really choosing to create gratitude more often, choosing to create elevated emotions more often, instead of coming at a place where you're reacting to life. You are intentionally creating life in the moment and in the now. And by doing that, you are living less in fear and less in anxiety, but more just the value of the now and creating it. So, and real quick, I'll just dial back because I'm sorry, I want to be clear. I answered your question. So to the point, if you decide, there's so many people who aren't slapped in the face, so to speak, to have that awakening, right? To have that, oh my gosh, I don't want to live this life anymore. Oh my gosh, I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to be somebody who behaved this way, whatever that means for you. If you just started, like, I'm just even curious as to what it might be like to not have to be that way. You know what I mean? Instead of being, oh my gosh, I got hit by a car, or I got so drunk that this happened, or whatever. Who knows? Everybody has a different thing, right? As opposed to that, just if you're hearing this now, decide what would it be like if I spent an hour every day just in gratitude, like for life itself. Like, what would happen to my body physically? What would happen to my relationships? How would I start looking at life? And so you don't necessarily need to have that traumatic experience. It's like, oh my gosh, I need to bounce back from that, as much as I can just decide. And it's going to take some intention, and it's going to take some practice, and it's going to take some persistence. it is a bit of work, right? Anything worth doing takes time and effort. And so this is no different, because you've had X amount of years as yourself, with the habits that you've had and with the experiences that you've had that have made you who you are. But if that's not who you want to be, it's your responsibility to do something about it. And I'm saying that you can do something about it right now. And you know, this can be your wake up call. It doesn't have to be something as traumatic as there are events out there.
No, it's a totally fascinating, and I can't remember if it was Joe Dispenza or somebody else is saying, more or less, well, you can just change your past, and you, I suppose you think of that from a traditional labeled scientific point of view, you kind of go, well, that's, unless I can time travel, that's nonsense.
Right.
But actually, you can change your past, right?
Totally. Well, in the sense that, going back to the point of not remember, like we remember it the way we want to remember it, the way that fits our story, the way that fits who we say we are now, the way that fits our identity. So if I told you that, oh, this happened to me when I was a kid and that happened to me and poor me, and that's my past, instead I said, oh my gosh, like this, right? It's all energy. And because had that never happened to me, I wouldn't have gone this area. And had that never happened to me, meaning these could be viewed as negative experiences, but I'm now changing my past to like this perfect, journey that led me to be where I am now, so that I can be who I want to be now. Right. So in some level, because in the grand scheme of things, man, like I don't remember every hour from last Tuesday, never mind 10 years ago. Right. And so all these different things we attach emotion to certain powerful memories. And even then, again, we remember them in a certain way that helps us believe the story that we're telling ourselves. And if we want to change our story, we have to change our story. That makes sense. And again, to quote Dr. Joe, because I don't want to come across as somebody who's making all this stuff up, it really has had such a positive influence. To change your reality, you need to change your personality, because your personality is typically based on what you believe your past is, and that's how you show up every day. And so when you do change your personality, I'm no longer this person who feels this way about X, or is angry about that, or is constantly talking about my past in a negative way, to someone who is happy to see people and is excited about the future and is constantly thinking of something to create. Like, those are choices, and those are decisions, and those are ways of being. And when you do that with intention and purpose and follow through, you create a new personality, and you have a new life, and you have a new outcome, and you have a new reality.
You've used a couple of big words, and we'll circle back in terms of intention and purpose and things like that. But first of all, I was kind of curious to know what's your coaching style?
This is it. This is my coaching style, to be honest with you. And that's a great question. And there are a lot of great coaches out there who will have a whole workbook and will have a whole exercise thing. And here's our thing, what we're going to do for the next 6 weeks. I am more like, okay, who are you today? Who do you want to be today? What's coming up for you? And what's come up for you since the last time we spoke, right? We're going to work on some stuff. I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to challenge you on some limiting beliefs. And I'm going to show you, from my experience as a coach and as someone who's living their best life, some of my lessons in life. And I'm going to see how they serve you, and if they do. And I'm going to ask you questions about yourself. So I'm very present in the now. It doesn't matter. In fact, I've been on coaching calls. I'm like, suddenly something comes to me where I will make up an exercise and we'll try it right there based on just some information that we're kind of coming up with together. But I'm more of a right brain creative, in the now type of a coach than I am somebody who's going to, spend hours working on writing a left brain workbook for you to fill out
Mm-hmm.
until we meet next week.
Yeah. And where would we find you in your natural state and your flow state?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean physically?
Well, we'll give you flow state first, and as in where are you, almost your subconscious overtakes your conscious, in terms of, somewhere where you feel great and you're kind of going, I like the sound of me. So,
Yeah. So this is an example. That's a great question. So thank you. So I love sharing the truth of the now. Like I love just pointing out the lessons, and because it's hard to deny, I guess, if other people, no matter what your background or your spiritual is, like it's hard to deny that there is only now. Like nobody can say, well, are you in the future right now? No, they're here, right? I love music. I'm a huge fan of music. I typically have it playing all the time. In fact, one of my challenges is that I would like to read more books, or even listen to more books on audio, something like that. But in my downtime, which would be a good time to do that, I prefer to be listening to music. Like I really do enjoy I'm a huge fan of the band Fish. I don't know if you're familiar with them in Ireland. The band is called Fish, spelled Phish. And actually, what's interesting, when I study myself, they are an improvisational band. Like really, sometimes their songs will be 30 to 40 minutes to an hour long.
wow.
And you never hear the same version of the same song twice. In fact, as a quick example, they played Madison Square Garden in New York City. In 2017, they did a thing called the Baker's Dozen. And so they did 13 concerts in a row, with maybe a break here and there, but over a couple of weeks, and they never repeated a single song. And so every night, and so I went to 5 of those. So 5 of the 13, I know people went to all 13, because you're there in the moment and you're there to be surrounded by a community that is just curious to see what's going to happen next. And so in that space, and I also they're amazing musicians, right? So that comes down to it. But so to answer your question, when I'm often in flow, when I'm hearing music that kind of sings to my soul, when I'm listening and I'm genuinely curious as to what the next moment is going to bring. I think that's a great way that I'm in flow. And sometimes when I'm on podcasts, when I'm in a coaching session, like that is definitely when I'm in flow, because I'm not necessarily, I have no agenda except for the truth. And except for my curiosity is what's the next level of truth can be. And when you start to feel that and be that, it becomes a great place to be.
That's awesome. I'm just curious as well. I'm trying to listen to your language, and in terms of you switch, and I don't know whether that's this coaching style or what. You're so kinesthetic, visual, auditory, but you seem to peak highest in your energy and your response state in terms of auditory. So when you talk about music, that's kind of where you resonate. Does that make sense? Is that a fair judgment?
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, it's funny. So I'm not a great, yes, is the short answer. I love music. I love sounds. I do take them in. When I think about the now, often when I'm outside, I do listen for birds. I do listen for, I'm very aware of what's happening around me. I think mostly that probably comes from a love for music. Before I was a coach, I actually worked in artist management. So I managed a bunch of bands as an entrepreneur. And what I loved most about that was really just connecting with the humans that were musicians and being a part of that whole process. And so, yeah, I mean, I typically, when I'm working, unless I have to read something that I'm writing, I typically have music playing all the time. And so, and also I'm like just a super fish nerd. So that heightened excitement was probably more about fish than it was necessarily just about music. The two things that I'm most passionate about. I mean, besides also two of the things I'm most passionate about are certainly personal growth and that band Fish, right? Some people are Star Wars nerds. Some people are whatever. Like there's enough of a 30, 40-year career that I can follow and like being nerd about.
It's interesting that you appear to get a lot of joy from the fact that it's different. The with the fish there, that it's not the same tune over and over and over again. It's there is a variability which almost keeps your brain busy, occupied,
Yeah,
engaged.
absolutely. Well, and their whole way of playing is just, that's what it is. It's all about you. I mean, I've seen them over 100 times easily since 1993. And so when you're there, it's like you walk in just with there's no expectations except for to have no expectations. And when you're there, and also they're good musicians, right? It is music that I like as well. So it's a style of music that I enjoy, but I never know where it's going to go. And that's kind of the fun of it. So I think, I don't know, it is a way to be here now, but also it is if you do a little research into their music, it's really, they're amazing at energetic release. Like they have it down where just the buildup of energy, and not necessarily in the way a DJ might. I guess a similar energy, right? Sometimes you hear these house mixes where it's build, and then they drop that big bass bomb or whatever it is. So Fish does that in a different way, but it's pretty powerful. Carlos Santana said when he watched them play, he said it was like a hose. Like I just watched this hose just pouring over the audience, and the audience was just flowers, like taking the water and just take it in. And so a lot of the time you hear people like Fish fans will talk about the lead guitarist is a guy named Trey Anastasio, and he will they'll say, "Up, Trey's turning on the hose," right? And all of a sudden, and you can see the crowd going wild. So it's pretty nuts.
Are you aware of sort of the Mike Oldfields and Tubular Bells, things like that? I mean, it was more
I'm
of a
not.
British band, and I know that was sort of big. I mean, he had I mean, I know for certain records over here that was they were the big sign. They were the one. He was the one that sort of brought them into the mainstream. But he would have 45-minute tracks. It's like just psychedelic type,
Totally, and that's where it is. But they play rock, they play jazz, they play, I mean, a little bit of everything. Trey, again, he's composed orchestras. He's done he's literally in fact, during this pandemic thing, as a fan, I've been most concerned for him because the guy has literally been on tour for like 30 years, right? Whether he's in his main band or 4 or 5 other pieces that he does. And he lives in New York City, and just to be trapped in this apartment for 6 or 7 months, like I'm like every day, I'm like, oh, I wonder what Trey's doing. He like recorded his own album while he was like kind of trapped in there, and he did like a lo-fi thing just with the stuff that he had in the apartment. So he released an album on it. Anyway, yes. So I could probably talk about fish for too long. So it's a good thing.
Take us right back to Junior Ryan. Who are we talking to? Who are we looking at?
Junior Ryan?
Mm.
Like when I was a younger person?
Young in your single digits.
Yeah. So that's a great question, man. I'll think out loud. So I grew up a small boy. Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey for most of my life. My father was for better or for worse, a serial entrepreneur as well. And much of that it's funny because I would say, as far as I can tell and remember, he was not a very successful entrepreneur until I was probably about 13 or 14, maybe a little bit around there. So this first couple of years, I've come from talking to my older brother and kind of just even my mom and different things, I didn't realize it, but really we're more or less poor, right? We're in a space we weren't really my dad really wasn't making a ton of money, was working on a couple different things. So, but I mean, I had a good life. I lived in suburban New Jersey in general. I think the house wasn't necessarily being paid for, but we had a house, right? I wasn't so poor that I was in pain or we were struggling. There wasn't conversation around being, oh my gosh, we don't have enough. There was never that thing. But at a young age, so I was born in 1975. I had an older brother. My younger brother, right under me, was born in 77 and another born in 1980. So even by the time I was 5, I had 3 siblings, right? And then the next brother was born in maybe 1984. So by the time I was 9, I had 4 siblings. And so I was kind of this older brother, and we were kind of just doing the thing as kids. And then I think 1989, my sister was born, and that would be so at that point there were 6 of us. And shortly thereafter, my parents got divorced. But at that point, and I'm just thinking out loud again, that was a point my father had gotten into construction, and out here in Western New Jersey, he had bought a bunch of property and really did very well, actually. I would say he was a millionaire at one point. This is the mid 80s. This was like the real estate boom, and there was all sorts of good stuff going on. We had a nice house on 8 acres of property, and we had a house down the shore, and we had, so there was this, and like, that's the stuff that I didn't know that I didn't have until I got it. And then when I got it, it just seemed like that's what I'd always had. Right. So I wasn't aware that we were in lack before until all of a sudden I was aware that we had cool stuff, and he drove a brand new Corvette and, that type of stuff. We had a horse farm but shortly thereafter, I wouldn't say that my dad was the best. There was a reason. He didn't always make the best decisions, I think. Excuse me, from a financial standpoint. And so then he invested in a restaurant, and that didn't go so well. And so shortly thereafter, my parents ended up getting divorced. And so this takes me into the teens. I don't know if that's where you are. I'm really, again, thinking out loud. So my younger years was spent a lot of the time just being a kid in New Jersey, growing up, listening to classic rock, being a brother, I guess.
Mm. Well, how was school for you?
How was school for me?
Mm.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was a good or bad student. I'm kind of a procrastinator. I was very there for the social aspects of things. I was like, I was the mascot in 8th grade. Like, so I was jumping around this little eagle suit, like at the basketball guy. I couldn't play basketball. I wouldn't play sports, but I wanted to hang out with everybody. So actually, it was pretty cool. I'll never forget. I was in 7th grade. So I was maybe 12, 13 years old, just going into puberty. And our girls basketball team was going to the championships. And so I got to ride on like the bus with the girls basketball team and the cheerleaders. It's like, and me, because I was the mascot in this eagle suit, right? I was like the host of the school talent show. I like did lip syncs. Like I loved being social. I loved being friendly with people. I was never a very competitive person in the sense I was really never into sports. I played a little bit of baseball here and there, but I wouldn't say I was passionate. I never watched sports on television. So I think in general, I mean, I liked it. I would say I was popular in the sense that it wasn't like, when you see movies like the popular kids, I don't think I was like in this crowd of popular kids as much as I just was able to really get along with everybody. If you were not a popular kid or you were a popular kid, I kind of could get along with you and would hang out with you. And, I was, that's the way I think I would describe myself all through high school, really.
And when you were going to sort of grow up, what were you going to do?
That's a great question. So at a younger age, I think by the time I realized what I wanted to do in high school, I wanted to get into filmmaking.
Hmm.
And this
Why?
is one of those things, like this goes back to your question about my past, right? So there was a story I had in my head for a while that I just didn't get any support from my family, and I wanted to go to film school. I even brought a couple film schools to my parents or my mom really, and I said, "Hey, this is what I want to do." And my mom certainly had her share, and really has had an interesting life as well. Really put up with quite a bit. Um, but I kind of remember her being kind of like, well, without saying it, listen, she was under the belief that there was no way it could happen. She wasn't necessarily, didn't understand the effort that could have been placed to seek out scholarships or whatever. She had a bunch of kids and was in the right. So she didn't go through that level of it. But I think it was more like, hey, she kind of placated me like, well, maybe, yeah, maybe, until it was almost too late type of a thing. Okay. And then we moved on. So, but I remember Quentin Tarantino. I remember really being into like Reservoir Dogs, and when Pulp Fiction came out, like I was like, okay, like I could make movies like that. That seems like a lot of fun to do. And in fact, I did write a screenplay at one point that I love, and I still I plan to produce at some point. It's part of my I am statements. It'll definitely get made. And I will say that screenplay has been the catalyst, really, in some capacity. And it's a longer story, but the catalyst for me getting into coaching. So, but I definitely wanted to get into filmmaking, and I still plan to. I think it's not necessarily my life purpose, but it is, as being an ADD entrepreneur and somebody who likes to create things. I think it is something that I certainly will do as well. But yeah, I love telling stories. I love directing people in the sense that, not necessarily for control, obviously, but for just to kind of see something be created, and then to have the film afterwards. Like, oh my gosh, that came out of my mind, and look, there it is. It's something that it's tangible, and we can show people and share. It's a lot of fun.
Kind of curious how that was serving you. I mean, there's sort of it comes across a little bit like, not quite a pleaser gene, a promoter gene, and very much, I give you something, I get energy, and vice versa. Is that a fair pickup?
You're talking. I'm sorry, I didn't follow you on that one. So you're saying with the.
Just in terms of, I suppose, you were saying there, even in terms of, I was curious that you were the engine inside the mascot, in terms of helping other people, in terms of, sort of that screenplay. It's almost like a kind of almost a slight disassociation, and whether it's, but yet you were there to bring pleasure and joy for other people without necessarily being center stage.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. Yeah, so there's an opportunity for me to connect with other people, but it doesn't have to be about Ryan Michael Stanley.
Mm, mm,
It can be about just life itself and fun. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Something I hadn't really thought about.
mm,
But at the same time, like, so I did recently publish a book, and I do, have a podcast. And so, again, thinking out loud, there certainly is a piece that is attached to my name and who I
mm,
am. But I think that the message in the end is not necessarily check out Ryan. It's who do you want to be? Who
mm,
do you want to be, right?
mm. I'm sure we'll get to it. I mean, I think, well, my sort of belief is that, I think you get to a point in your life where you just cut ties and you go, screw everyone else. What do I want? You know,
That's the
and
most important decision that anyone can make.
mm,
And it's not necessarily even screw everyone else as much as it just doesn't matter.
yeah.
What anyone else thinks doesn't matter. In fact, what anyone else thinks is none of my business, because it literally has nothing to do with me.
Mm,
And it's the most powerful decision anybody can make, in my opinion, because really what holds people back from being the best versions of themselves, and I've seen it 1,000 times, is fear.
mm,
Not only fear, but fear of what other people think.
mm,
And so many of my clients, I've said to them, like, after kind of going deep, it always comes, not always, but often comes down to the same thing. And I'll just say, tell me if you, and so anybody who's listening and watching this out there, really, you can go through this as well. Think about it for a moment. If you didn't care, if you literally didn't care what anyone else thought, meaning your parents, your friends, your siblings, anybody who's a sphere of influence in your life, if you had no concern about what they thought of you, what would be different about your life? And so many times it's just like, oh my gosh, whatever, you name it. I'd be so free. Like it's this feeling of freedom. And that's the truth. It's like we get caught up in this fear of what someone else thinks. And you know what? They're not living their life for you, and nor should they be. So why would you live your life for them? And that doesn't mean, and as I hope to lead by example, doesn't mean that you can't live a powerful life that serves others. But to live your life based on what other people think doesn't serve you either. And if we step into self-love and we start to create a life where we are serving ourselves as often as possible, not to be selfish and to be better than anybody else, but to just live this gift called life, other people will not only be inspired, but influenced, and they will go ahead and do the same thing. And so when we step into our greatness and we decide who we want to be, and that it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. I mean, literally, let's just say I have a friend named Joe, and Joe thinks that I'm being a jerk right now, or Joe comes in and says, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard, Ryan. Don't do that. Whatever. Hey, Joe, I'm going to start a new business, and it's going to be called X. And he says, Ryan, that's the stupidest idea I ever met. Well, if I was born to Joe's parents, and I lived every single second of Joe's life, and up to that moment, I came in and saw Ryan, I would think the same thing. But that has nothing to do with me, or my life, or my future. Now, if Joe was a very successful business person in that business that I wanted to start, and he had an opinion, he said, listen, here's why that won't work based on my experience, then that's a lesson. That's an opportunity for growth. And that's something that how I can still pivot to be more of what I want to be. But just for the sake of those, well, my mom's not going to like this. She doesn't think I'm going to succeed. My friends think that's stupid. Like, that doesn't serve you or them, right? Because what serves them is you being the best version of yourself, and you stepping into your greatness, and you recognizing that you have this gift called life. And your gift and your life is going to be completely different from anybody else. The other thing that comes up for me is that, people are, part of the reason people don't necessarily pursue their dreams or what they want from a financially abundant standpoint is they believe, subconsciously or not, that everybody wants the same thing, and everybody wants what they want. And therefore, there can't be enough of it. Right? Because if the billions of people on the planet want what I want, because it makes sense, it's what I want, why wouldn't you want it? Why wouldn't everybody want it? Then there can't be enough of it. And they're not necessarily saying that out loud, but that's this feeling. It's like, oh my gosh, it's too difficult to get to. Everybody else wants it. But the truth is that everybody has had such a unique experience. There's billions and billions of unique experiences happening right now, and they have nothing to do with your experience. They can be part of your path. They can be part of your journey. They can be opportunities for growth. They can be examples of lessons. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but they're not your journey. And what you want and who you want to be and what you love deep down inside is unique to you. It's the song of your soul. And when you start singing that song, I'm actually even getting emotional now. When you start singing that song to your soul as often as possible, and you are not afraid for anybody to hear it, that's where the power lies. And that's when you start to step into the greatness of life. And that's when people start to not judge you for singing, but hear the beauty and feel the beauty of your song.
When are you most in that state in terms of that sort of singing, that soul that you actually feel super connected?
I think just now it would be an example. I think when I'm sharing that truth with myself, with my children, next to coaching is my second favorite thing next to parenting. And I think they are both places. The reason I love them both so much is they are both places where I'm consistently teaching and learning at the same time. So parenting is a constant reflection of who I am as a human being, like constant, because I consider myself a patient, joyful, present person. And my kids are good kids without like major health issues and without major anxiety. I mean, they're 9 and 6 and without major issues. And I find myself, reaching levels of anger and stress because I've told you 17 times just to put your shoes on and we need to go somewhere, whatever it is, or to do your homework. And you told me you did, and I just found out that you didn't, right? These types of things. And that all comes from ego and wanting the outcome to be different and wanting to control the situation. So I think when I recognize myself getting angry or frustrated or even yelling or shouting at my children, then afterwards I'm like, is that really helping them? Is that really, is that creating the outcome that I want, or is that creating a person who I'm in charge of creating for now that is fearful or that is looking for anger to happen to them or learning to react to stress? So when I think about that for a moment, I'm able to, it's a great lesson because I can then step back and be, okay, listen, that's not who I want to be. That's not who I want them to be. Right. So it's like the walking the talk situation. So I am in flow and I am most myself. My song is my soul of my song is sung often when I'm with my children because I'm really thinking about, I know for a fact that they're always listening and they're always learning and they're copying, whether I know it or they know it or not, what they do, what I'm doing. And so to be the best version of myself, not only for me, but for them, so that they can go on to be the best version of themselves for others, right? It's like this constant ripple effect that is happening with the people who are close physically in proximity, closest to you, and then obviously who you also have the most love for. And so when I'm sharing these truths with you and your audience, when I'm sharing these truths with my children, when I'm thinking about that, when I wrote my book, it was literally just about like being in flow of how do we be a good guy, to go back to the start of the call, right?
Are you naturally patient?
I don't know if I could say is anybody naturally patient. I think patience is an acquired skill. So yes, actually, again, these are great questions, by the way. I really appreciate your time, and your insight and your curiosity. Part of me says yes, going back to, because first I was like, no, I know that patience was definitely learned. I know there's moments when I'm not patient, for a fact, right? And I haven't been, more so when I was younger. And I know that I've striven, is that a word? I've strived? I've striven?
Just now, it's good.
Yeah, it is that. Yeah, I strive to be patient. It's again, it comes with intention. I'm intentionally want to learn to be patient, and that's the title of my book is "Be Patient, Be Present, Be Joyful." Right. So that the first couple words of my book is "Be Patient." So it is something that is a choice. But to answer your question, if I think about being a younger person, and I think about I didn't necessarily know that it was patience as much as I was. Well, it's not so bad, right? I wasn't necessarily as stressed or angry at different things that weren't happening as fast that maybe other people might have been. And so maybe I didn't know it was patience, and I just felt it was more easygoing, if that makes sense. But I think now if I'm looking back, and I would say there's a piece of me that is more patient in comparison to others from a younger age on.
I noticed a slight attenuation when you talked about patience, and I know it was in relation to kids, which
Yeah. Well, that is literally that is where I'm the least patient. And it's funny because that's who I love most. I can say that I did not understand unconditional love until I had children. I might have thought I did. I love my wife. I love my brothers. I have best friends who I've been best friends with since I was, 13 years old, and we're still great friends today. I love them, but unconditional love, like I didn't understand what that feeling was. And then, so I say that now they're the ones that I yell at the most, right? And it's not that I'm yelling every day. I'm not coming across like they're not coming home like, but when you literally tell your children not to do something, you walk out of the room, you come back in the room, they're doing at it. Like that's where my impatience comes in. So
it's it's the point of deepest emotional connection, but also the point of potentially least control, where they can push your buttons,
totally.
they can flip your switch very quickly and do everything. So no, it's
and that's when it comes down to, do I want to be in control or do I want them to learn the lesson? And that's really what I always go to when I find myself yelling at them. I rarely spank them. There was points in my life where I was going through stressful times when I was younger, especially having younger kids. And I spanked them more often because when they were misbehaved, right? And I had a moment where I was just like, is this, I just hit him, right? And I'm like, is he now going to feel better? Like, is he going to learn the lesson now because I physically hurt him? Or is he learning to physically hurt somebody when they don't do what they tell you? And when I realized that, I was like, okay, so, so now every time when I get to that level of stress or anger, I do different things. I ask more questions, I think, than anything.
It does. I mean, it takes a level of patience to do that. It's a different skill set, right? It's there. So, I'm gonna slight change track on you. What would you be kind enough to share some of your bucket list with us?
Bucket list. I definitely need to travel more. Like recognizing I've traveled a bit, but really not very much. And so just to I know it's not a very specific bucket list as much as really just the bucket list would be like travel 10 times a year or something like that. You know what I mean? Like have a consistent practice of seeing the world and recognizing, because there's just so much out there that I haven't seen and physically been a part of. I think there's you connect with humanity on a different level when you see cultures all around the world, when you experience different climates, when you experience different ways of being. And so a bucket list overall would just to be, certainly hit all 7 continents type of a thing for starters. I'd like to go to dinner with Trey Anastasia from Fish and get some hang time with him. I think that's certainly on the bucket list. I don't know, man. Like I live a pretty great life. Like I'm very aware that I'm blessed. Getting emotional right now again. So That's a good question. I have to think about it a little bit more. I don't sit and think about a bucket list. My bucket list is something that I think about every day, right? It's sell 1.6 million copies of my book. It is, I have a company called Teach Me to Sell it, and it's have that be successful so that I can teach people to sell, people who are afraid of sales. It's like all these different things that I'm working on every single day anyway. I have a t-shirt company, so it's like sell 10,000 shirts a month. It's all these different things that are accumulative, but as a result of my life experience. Like that's really my bucket list. Like enjoy life is my bucket list. Experience the world. So we go back to travel. That was easily the first thing that came up to my mind. But also it's really just keep doing what I'm doing. It's accomplish the things that I'm already working towards.
You might get this. I mean, I think you mentioned one about your bucket list was the film. Your
Definitely. Yeah. So that's clearly, I'm sorry. Thank you. Absolutely. 100%.
not that I want to put stuff on your list, but
No, I appreciate that because it should have actually, what's interesting about that is had you asked me that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been easily number one. And it probably still is in the grand scheme of things. Like I said earlier, it will happen before them. So it is the bucket list, right? This is the thing that kind of started me on my journey. And I'll share that real quick, just because I've said it now twice. I knew that I wanted to get into filmmaking. I didn't know where to begin. I didn't have an education. I didn't know anybody in film. And so I said, well, what if I just started with a screenplay and then I can make it. So I wrote a screenplay. And this was back in 2004. And excuse me. And so I wrote this, and it's geared towards the fish community, right? So it is like, it's a buddy comedy. It's a stoner comedy. It's like this, these two guys, this was right out. So Fish had actually broken up in 2004 for about 5 years. And so the premise is there's this guy and there's these two guys, their favorite band broke up. And so they had been touring around the country, kind of following them. And so one guy decides, okay, now's the time to get my life together, right? Now that the band's not touring anymore, it's time for me to grow up and do something about it. And the other guy is like, the opposite direction. He's like, no, he just sells weed for a living, and like it kind of drags him down every step of the way. And it's a comedy. It's more Seinfeld. That's not really about anything. It is just about the interaction. And I say that this is in the, so it's for fish fans, because the fact that it's filled with Easter eggs. So it's not like if you watched it and you weren't a fish fan, you wouldn't know that it's for fish fans, right? It's not like, oh my gosh, I don't get any of this. It's definitely a linear comedy. You can follow it. You get it. It's all regular stuff. But if you're a fish fan, you're going to notice the characters' names. You're going to notice like things in the background, like all these different things are all the kind of subliminal kind of secret winks. So I bring this up for a point that after I wrote the screenplay, I found out that the lyricist for Fish, this guy named Tom Marshall, was actually, I ended up connecting with him on MySpace, right? And so it turns out that he was recording in a studio about 15, 20 minutes from my home. And I found this out from connecting with him on MySpace. And so we ended up becoming friends on MySpace. And then so I ended up going to the studio to meet him. And we ended up talking, and we ended up getting along, and we just ended up hitting it off. And I ended up becoming the manager for his band. He said, listen, I'm really not into screenplay. I'm really not into movies. This is nothing that I can really do. And I don't have as much influence in the Fish camp in that area, where my brain, it was like, oh, I'll give him the screenplay and he's going to know everything. And they'll give it to the band and they're going to want to make it because they're going to love it. And that was my idea. And so he said, listen, we can't do any of that. Love the screenplay, but that's not going to happen. It's the short version. And so we started hanging out. I started spending time with them. And I said, well, I do have an entrepreneurial background. I do have some business sense. Let's do this. And I ended up managing his band. And then I ended up getting office space in that same studio. And there's a guy named Anthony Kryzan who was in the same band with Tom Marshall. They had a side band called Amphibian. So Fish is Phish, Amphibian was AMFI, instead of with the PH, it's spelled with the F, so it's kind of swapped. But anyway, Anthony Kryzan is a guitarist for Amphibian, but he was also in the Spin Doctors. He played with Lenny Kravitz. And so he has this studio, and there was some office space connected to it. So I got some office space there. I rented out a room there. And so then other bands would come in, and then I would end up managing them. And so like there was an opportunity. And so I kind of took advantage of that, and I started, connecting with the music, and I was managing those bands. And then through that, which we already touched on, what I loved about management was I loved connecting with these musicians and showing them how to be the best versions of themselves and letting them know they could set huge goals. And then it was going to take effort, but what was your mindset like as you're going through it? I loved supporting them. I didn't necessarily like dealing with shady club owners. And I didn't really like some of the business stuff side of it, right? It didn't light me up. And so after a couple of years of this is when I suddenly, in October of 2008, I heard this term coaching, came up in 3 times in the same month. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do. That is who I am. Like it is empowering others. It is, I don't necessarily need to do the business stuff. I can do my own business stuff, but I don't necessarily need to I don't need to go out to New York City till 3:00 in the morning on a Wednesday, listening to the same music over and over again, and trying to sell it. I can just be at home and serve people and help musicians be the best version of themselves. So that's the tightest version of how writing that screenplay led me to where I am today. You know what I mean? Like, had I not done that and then pursued Tom and then gotten that office space and then decided that I wanted to be a coach, then I wouldn't have gotten certified and become who I am. So all that to be said, and real quick, I will say, after I made the screenplay, it was always, and going back to what I said about 2-3 years ago, had you asked me, I wanted to get into coaching and do this stuff so I could make enough money to produce the screenplay. I started a t-shirt company so I could make enough money to, have a couple $100,000 to put in the screenplay. So it was always this thing, like this was like the carrot for me, was to make this movie. Because as to your point, as a younger person, I was like, well, I want to make a film, right? I wanted to be in filmmaking, and I've still yet to do that. I've participated in a couple like film challenges here and there with my brother and different things many, many years ago. But it was a cool carrot that led me to be exactly who I am today. And now I don't think about the film very often at all, as now I think more about changing the world. And so, but had that catalyst little part of the journey, and they always say hindsight is 20/20 and this whole thing, going back to, now we'll circle it back to, we can change our past, right? So I could be the same person that said, my parents never supported me and never sent me to film school. And then I couldn't do anything with it. And I had to figure out my own way, and I had to do this different things and, this, that, and the other thing. Or as I am saying now, had I not done that, I wouldn't have written that screenplay, which led me to be this place where I'm influencing the world one person at a time, whatever it is, this way of being that I am wouldn't have happened had I not been on that path. And so I'm so grateful for the path and exactly who I am today.
That's awesome. I mean, it's amazing to see that. I'm curious, I mean, if just give us some thought in terms of how would you compare sort of goals to bucket lists? Because you sort of switched around there, and I'm just curious to know your take on it.
Yeah. I guess it depends on the individual, right? So, I mean, and I'm thinking out loud, they're kind of the same thing, or they could be the same thing. I would say that they should be the same thing. I don't really like the word should, because that would be judging somebody, but I think they could be the same thing. And ideally, if you are living on purpose, they are going to be the same thing. Right? So it's not like, oh, I need to do this before I die, as much as I just want to do this because I'm alive and I can.
In terms of, again, I'm sort of flopping around here a bit, but
Love it.
In terms of goal setting, then, I mean, is that something that, obviously from your coaching background and stuff, is that something that's intrinsic in your life?
Totally. Absolutely. And so, when I say my I am statements, those are my goals, right? Those are my intentions. What's important from my experience, though, is to not get caught up in the finish line as much as it's, been said 1,000 different ways. Like, it's the journey, but it's really the truth. If there is only now, it's about creating gratitude for the outcome that I want, and knowing what these goals are, and asking myself, genuinely be curious, how are these goals serving me? And how are they serving my family and those I love? And how are they serving my overall purpose? And that purpose can change, from week to week as well, right? Or month to month, year to year, as we grow, as we mature, as we have different experiences. So I think goals are really important. I think they are carrots, they are drivers, and everybody's going to be affected. Everybody's going to utilize goals differently. For me, I keep them as a North Star. So meaning, if I want to be healthy, if I want to be whatever the different things that I've decided my goals are, having them as a North Star, I can always ask myself, is my behavior leading me to that? And if it's not, then there's an opportunity for me to change. Is my thought going to help me accomplish that goal? Is the way I'm thinking about life right now going to help me accomplish that goal? Is that going to be moving me forward towards who I want to be as a filmmaker, as an entrepreneur, as, you know what I mean? If it all comes down to being human. So if I'm not choosing my thoughts and my behaviors appropriately, then I'm good. It's going to take me longer to get those goals and get to who I want to be.
I'm just curious there, because you talk about your behavior obviously is in terms of almost a form of past tense, your thoughts being current, now, or future. And I'm just wondering, I mean, how do you then sense check? You're saying, well, my North Star is here, my behavior has been this, they're not in alignment maybe.
Yeah.
But how can you sense check or just verify that actually it's a mental block in some ways, that actually your North Star is correct? It's just, yeah, your behavior's been off, but because of negative thoughts or something else that's been going on? Or do you say, well, actually, no, that's a genuine behavior. I've responded in this way, therefore it must be that I don't actually believe that's the right thing for me.
No, and so maybe, and thank you for clarification. So the North Star is correct. Like that's why it's the North Star, because it's exactly where I want to go. I've already decided that. I've written it down. I've made time to write down who I want to be and what I want, you know, in the grand scheme of things, when I look back on my life, what I want to have accomplished. So the behavior isn't a bad thing. It just wasn't serving the path of the North Star. It wasn't keeping me on lines, but I can always go back. That's why there's the North Star. So I'm not going to sit and spend time judging myself for behaving in a way that was made sense. Again, going back to when I behaved that way, I was exactly who I should have been based on every single second of life that I lived up until that moment. And so I behaved that way for those reasons, and that's okay. And the awareness of that behavior and that it's not serving my path and it's not leading me towards my North Star is the powerful part, because that's like today. So now, again, bring it back to the now. Do I want to spend my physical energy thinking about why that was bad or why that was wrong or why that didn't serve me? Or do I want to create energy that is thinking about how am I going to be moving in the direction of my North Star? So it's not judging myself for being one way or the other as much as deciding who I want to be now with that experience under my belt, with that knowledge. How many times do I want to do that behavior before I decide is enough is enough? And the thing is, everybody's going to be different, and everybody's going to have different thresholds, and everybody's going to have different points of awareness and, excuse me, different choices based on their life. And so when we stop comparing ourselves to others, we stop judging others, and we just do our stuff, right? Just keep looking at ourselves with gratitude for life and intention and purpose. We'll either, one of two things are going to happen. We're either A, going to get there, or B, we're going to spend our life doing exactly what we wanted to do. And ideally both.
So there's so much in that, and it's it's always mentally trying to unpack it. There's a lot there. Take us back again in terms of, so college for you. What were you doing? What was the process?
Yeah, so I did not, again, having a entrepreneurial family. Like, so my mom, anyway, so my dad always kind of started his own businesses. College wasn't like a thing. Hey, this is what you need to do. Don't worry, we're going to get good grades. You're going to go to college. We're going to make sure we have money. We're going to make sure you sell. Like, that was never like really a thing. It was almost like a, hey, maybe you'll go to college one day. Like, we didn't really spend time talking about it. It wasn't like a driver or a goal. I think, especially from my mom's standpoint, it was more of like a, just kind of like, hey, financially, this isn't really going to happen. Maybe magic will show up. Very faith-based, very born-again Christian household. So mom, probably just will pray about it, and I'm sure Jesus will take care of us in the end. And so and really came up to my senior in high school. I didn't really even have a plan. There was no plan for college whatsoever. And then my dad I was still living in New Jersey. My dad had moved to South Carolina. So my junior year, I moved to South Carolina for a year, and I lived there with my dad. My parents had got divorced, I guess my freshman year. And then sophomore year, I was around. I was partying a lot in a great way. I had a lot of really, really great times, but got in some trouble at the end of my sophomore year at school for partying in school, basically. And then went down to, then my dad my dad was then decided to move to South Carolina. And I said, well, this is a good opportunity for me to start fresh and try something new. So I went down to South Carolina with him. I lived there for a year. I hated the school. It was so different from where I came from. There was just, I made some really great friends there, but by the end of the year, I was really ready to come back up north. So I did. So I spent a year down there. My dad still stayed down there. He lived down there. So then I came up for my senior year. I wanted to graduate with all my best friends, that type of a thing. And then, and towards the end of senior year, I was like, well, I don't really have any college plans. And as the summer went on, I guess I spoke with my dad. And so there was a school called Trident Technical College down in Charleston, South Carolina. And I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but actually, let me tell you, when we talk about our stories, right? This is the story that I think I told people, that it was a smaller part of College of Charleston, which was a more respected college down there, right? So I was, again, fearful what other people would think. Am I going to this lesser known college? Is it anything? So I would say, oh, I'm going to Trident Tech. It's part of College of Charleston when it really wasn't, I think. So on my way down there, it's actually an interesting story because now that I'm thinking about it, you said, what was college like? So I left for college to drive down. I packed up everything I had in my car. I had this 1986 Cutlass Supreme that I had paid $23 for. It was not the best car in the world. I bought it from a friend of mine's parents. And he was basically just doing me a favor. He's like, well, all right, $25. And I said, I had $23 in my wallet. He's like, all right, fine, just give me the 23. So I ended up buying this car for $23. That was kind of a running joke for my senior year, $23 car. But so I'm driving to college, and I drive maybe an hour. I'm a little bit south of Philadelphia, and my car catches on fire and burns to the ground on the side of the road with everything I had in it on my way to college. So, you're going to college, university, I'm going to meet all new people. This is going to be a big thing. I kind of want to have my important stuff. Like, this is my identity. I'm taking it with me. And I walked out of the skis, which I don't even know why I was bringing them to South Carolina. Like, well, you never know. And some pictures and stuff like that. So lost just about everything I had. So came back. So during this time, it was time for you to register for your classes. And my father ended up registering me because he was already down there. And this is obviously, the internet was just starting, but you didn't do it online. You were there, you went to the school or whatever it was. And so he registered for me a bunch of courses that I had literally no interest in whatsoever. It was like macroeconomics and probability and statistics and things that just did not align with who I was. So I did about a semester there, and needless to say, I was not an awesome student. I didn't learn a ton of stuff. I was kind of just doing the thing. I got a job at a restaurant, like that type of a thing. And that was more or less my college experience. After the first semester, I came back up north, and I was living with my mom for a little bit, but didn't really want to stay there. I had a bunch of great friends whose parents were a little bit more focused on collegiate education. And so they were all at colleges. So I went on a bit of a tour, and I just went and I lived with some friends in colleges for a while. I spent, that second semester. So, January through June of 1994, I guess, just at people's colleges and kind of hanging out and meeting their friends and being social and figuring that whole thing out. That was probably the extent of my college experience.
What did you learn?
You know what? I learned, I guess, so there's two parts to this question. First one is, I wouldn't say that I learned it then, but I'm learning now as a parent. First of all, I still don't believe, especially now, that college is as important and worth the money that everybody says it's. That's clear, right? I mean, you can get as much education as you can probably get from university on the internet now. If you wanted to put in 16 hours a day, you could find out whatever information you want for free. So technically, that's a different topic. But I just learned, if it wants to be school or whatever, be prepared. It does make sense to, if you want to do something like film school. So I did want to go to film school, whether, college or not. I wanted to go to film school. So make time for that. Decide, put in the effort. It's not just going to happen one day. You do need to take action. You do need to take steps. So that I learned. But I also learned that, I stayed at some schools for months. I went to other people's places. And in fact, I stayed at one school. You couldn't leave campus. It was a smaller university, and they had I had a visitor's pass for the weekend when I came to visit. And if you left, you couldn't get back on without the visitor's pass. So I literally went there and had to live in this guy's dorms. And all the kids, and I got to meet everybody in the dorm. They nicknamed me Spicoli at the time. I don't know if you're familiar with Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but it's a movie from, I think it's the 80s. But Sean Penn plays this guy named Spicoli, and he's got this long hair, and I had longer hair at the time. And so a couple of people said I looked like him. But anyway, so I built up this personality. I guess what I learned is that I can adapt, and I can get to know people, and I can figure out the experience. And I learned that there's different cultures, even in these different schools around the country. And I learned there's different people who are on an adventure. And I learned that I could be that too.
I love it. It's kind of the chameleon effect. It's kind of going, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to adapt to the environment. And nobody noticed.
That's literally what it was. And kids had food cards, right? You would go to the whatever it's called, the cafeteria with your food card. And all these kids' parents had, these kids literally had more money every month on it. They had excess money that they had to spend. So I'd be like, listen, it's Spicoli. I got, you want a chicken sandwich? I'm going to the cafeteria. I have to spend this money by the end of this month. And so people would bring me food all the time, silly as it sounds. So again, the lesson is, had I had some drive, I could have been being more productive at that time. towards a career, but that's, I was who I was supposed to be at that time. So I learned how to connect and to adapt. But at the same time, I could have been more productive, I suppose, in hindsight.
So what happened on from that then? What sort of took shape after?
So in 1994, I came home. I think I ended up that summer getting a job at like Domino's Pizza. I was like a pizza delivery guy for a long time, for a little bit. I guess that's two things, a long time and a little bit. In fact, real quick, Fish Nerd note, I used to go to Fish concerts dressed as the Domino's guy. And so I would go to all these shows and I'd be in the concert and people would recognize me in the parking lot and come up to me and like, in fact, one time my father told me he was on a flight somewhere and he saw somebody who might have been, who knows, dressed in as a hippie or something like that. And my dad said, "You look like you like the band Fish." And the guy said, "Yeah, I love them. I see it a bunch of times." And he said, "My son likes the band Fish. He dresses like the Domino's guy. He dresses up in his and the guy was like, 'Your son's the Domino's guy?'" It was like this thing. It was kind of funny. Anyway, just fun to share. But I had to stop doing it because eventually people started taking my hat and wanted my belt and like it was some sort of thing, like the Domino's gear, my name tag, like, oh my gosh, just because it was funny and they were typically on acid or something. So anyway, that was a lot of fun. So that summer, I just spent really just trying to figure myself out. I think I worked for Domino's. I actually, now it's all coming back to me. I worked for there's a volunteer thing. It's kind of like the Peace Corps, but it was called AmeriCorps. I think it still exists today. And but instead of going anywhere, we stayed in America and we went and we helped people. I think there was different chapters of AmeriCorps. This was put out by Bill Clinton. I think it was one of his initiatives in his administration. And so our chapter here in New Jersey, it was like an environmental thing. We just kind of went and took care of parks around the area. We helped some old people. We worked with special needs people and kind of gave them work to do and kind of guided them through the thing. So that was something you put in for a year. And this was the idea. I think AmeriCorps was like, hey, if you put in your time, you help out your country, we're going to give you a stipend towards college. And I was like, okay, so I didn't go that 1 year, but now that maybe I'll use this towards film school or something, who knows where I was. And so I did AmeriCorps for a while. And then that was probably a year. And again, it's all kind of patchy, right? I'm putting bits and pieces together. I think probably around 1996, so at this point, my father had moved to Colorado and was looking to start a building business out there. And he wasn't making that happen. And so in the meantime, to bring in money, he started watching kids in the house, he and his wife, who was my stepmother at the time. They started watching kids in the house to bring in income so they could kind of figure out what they were doing. And they started bringing in a lot of income, actually. They were doing really well with it. So they decided to move back to New Jersey. And when they did, he said, listen, I'm doing this thing. I'm going to start this daycare center. You're good with kids. I used to watch all my siblings, and he knew that as well. And so I ended up helping him start up this business. So we started in his first home in New Jersey. We built a small school, and then we built a larger school. Excuse me. He ended up, so we were there for a couple of years. So I was kind of the director of the daycare. I also worked in the toddler room. I worked with the kids for a number of years. He and his wife at the time, then they got a divorce. She got the first one that they started, and then he had started this. We were in the process of building this second school. And so he and I went over and really kind of ran that school. And so I did that through probably 2002, give or take. And so that was part of the time when I was kind of growing up a little bit. I was still, partying quite a bit. Certainly I was in my 20s, at least easily 4 nights a week. I was out drinking, if not more. And just kind of doing the thing. I wouldn't say it was dangerous. I didn't need to have a drink after work or whatever, anything like that. But I was certainly had my share of intake. So I did that for, like I said, till 2002, 2003. And that was kind of, we'll take it. Then after that, I ended up working for my brother, who started a cell tower title search agency. So it sounds riveting, I know. But early 2000s, cell towers obviously blowing up. The cell industry was exploding, and he had some experience in construction in the cell industry. And so what he noticed was every time they built a cell tower, they needed to do a title search on the property. So they needed to make sure that the people who said they own the property, that all the liens had been taken care of and everything like that. So they were doing it this very archaic way. So he developed a way for us we would kind of be the middleman ouches. And wasn't very exciting, but I came in from a startup standpoint, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and I helped him run the finance side of things, and I kind of helped him organize his books. I helped him organize the money and make sure that the bill paying was going well. And then I did that till about 2005, maybe 2006. And then that's when I started getting into arts management.
Interesting that your screenplay came into, if I've got it right, because you're saying your screenplay was around 2004. That's when that came into play as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that was a point. I think I had stopped doing the daycare, right? I kind of stopped working with my dad. I love my brother, and it was a cool job, but I didn't love title search work and finance. Like it wasn't the song of my soul for sure. And so I would say to myself, like, what do I want to do? Who do I want to be? And I took it back to, oh my gosh, 10 years ago when I graduated high school in 93, I wanted to be in filmmaking. I wanted to, make films. And so it's time for me to do that. What am I going to do? And so that's when and again, Fish had just broken up, and I did some traveling. I went to Amsterdam for a long weekend, and I wrote a little bit of like the start of it in that space. And there's, in fact, the end of the movie ends with the main character in Amsterdam, kind of in that same space that I was at that time.
I'm not even going to ask about Amsterdam because that's a whole different.
Actually, it wasn't too crazy. I was by myself. It was like a 4 or 5 day weekend. Nothing too insane, but a good time.
Yes, yeah.
Some good people watching, Pete.
Yeah. I was going to say that's an awesome way. I'm curious then. I mean, I'm sort of switching forward again, but I mean, you mentioned there ADD a couple of times. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I use it tongue in cheek when I talk about being an ADD entrepreneur, but there's probably some very real truth there. Like I've never been diagnosed, never been really looked into it specifically from a clinical standpoint. But to the point earlier, like, I often say, like, I don't read a lot of books. I wrote a book, but I don't read them. I want to. There's some books out there that will change your life. I'm just not going to finish them. So even from a business standpoint, I love when I have an idea for a business, I haven't necessarily completed the other one before I'm excited to do the other one. And so it's not just like, hey, I'm giving up. In fact, that's almost the challenge that I have 5 or 6 businesses because I do believe in them. I'm just excited about what other opportunities are showing up. So I like I said, I sometimes say tongue in cheek that I'm an ADD entrepreneur, but it really is probably not even tongue in cheek. Like I really do get excited about different options and opportunities often. So my brain is constantly looking for opportunity in the now. And I think that every moment of life is an opportunity. So I think that's probably what it comes down to.
Well, where's your creative sweet spot in terms of, I mean, some people it's in the shower, walking the dog, whatever. I mean, do you have a place where just you tend to get into internal flow more?
I don't think so. It's a great question that I never thought about. And I think it's, so a lot of the time it's listening to music. I mean, it can be really anywhere. I'm down here in my office. A lot of the time I'm here late at night working on different things. So the short answer is no. I don't think there's one place where I'm like, oh, I always have a great idea. In fact, I couldn't even tell you where I was when I got most of my ideas. Just, they just come to me at different times because it's the follow through afterwards, right? So it's not, for me, it's not always necessarily when I have the idea that I remember as much as a week later when I do a little bit of research on Google or I do a little bit like, what does that actually look like? Who else there is out doing this? What would this look like? So I don't know if there's a specific area, but I will, now that you asked that, I will pay attention to see if there is a theme that shows up.
And earlier you talked about sort of inner talk and in terms of almost communication yourself. Talk to us about that. I mean, how is the inner chatter? Is it good crack?
Yeah, it's one of the most important things there are. In fact, in recent years, I find myself saying often, like, what the heck was I thinking about before? You know what I mean? Like when you say, like, when I think about just now, and I'm thinking about the 20s when I was working in the daycare center and I was doing things and having a great time and really enjoying time with my friends and whatever and partying, all this stuff. But like, what was I thinking about in my own? And that's not like negative, like, what was I thinking about? Like, but literally, I'm curious, like, what the heck was I spending my time thinking about? Because now I spend so much time thinking about who I want to be now. I spend so much time thinking, and maybe that's part of maturity. Maybe that's part of being a man in his 40s. I don't know. But I do spend so much more time thinking about life as a thing. Like, what is this thing, life, anyway, right? Thinking about recognizing if I am feeling down. I mentioned earlier, like, I certainly have what they call seasonal affect disorder, right? SAD. Like, as it starts to get darker and as we get closer and closer to December 21st, I find myself getting a little bit down here and there for no particular reason. In fact, I went through that last week. And it's not like, oh, this sucks or that's bad or anything like that, as much as I just kind of, I feel like I'm not myself, right? And so now in those moments, I say, in fact, I have this great, it's just literally happened this week, so I'll share it quickly. Every Sunday, I do a walking meditation. So I have a field out behind my house, and every Sunday I go out there and it's a Joe Dispenza thing. Like he has a bunch of different meditations, and there's 2 of them that you can download that are walking meditations. And so I put on my earphones and I just go for this walk around this field and I do this meditation. Love it. And at the end of it, I was a really powerful one this past Sunday. And at the end, I just had like this vision of like kind of what it would be like to wake up as a 45-year-old man into life, like to be born as a 45-year-old man, as myself into life, but not as a baby, but as a man today, right? So I wake up and like in this vision, I just kind of like looked at my hands and I'm like, okay, so this is it. I'm a human. Who do I want to be today? Like, this is it. Like it doesn't matter what my past was at all or what my future might have thought I was going to be. And I had this vision of like, this is it. And this, again, it's more in the now. And so when this past week, when kind of like as it's getting darker and as kids are going back to school and our schedules all change and like your brain is a little bit shifted, especially here, it's like kids are at home 3 days a week now. And I actually am homeschooling them. I mean, it's virtual, but they need more guidance than I would have liked them to need at this time. But I was able to just say, like, I go back to this vision of me just like opening my eyes and looking at my hands as if this is a new moment. And who do I want to be right now? Like, this is it. This is like this is the thing. This is life. And so to go back to your question of inner chatter, it's like, it's always can be a question of so curiosity is the answer. At any point, if I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, it's typically me because I'm judging something as bad. I'm judging my life. I'm judging there's not enough time. I'm judging that I'm not further enough along. I'm judging anything. Who knows? Could be anything. If I, in that same moment, be curious and I say, what would it be like if I, instead of judging myself as not good enough right now, I was genuinely curious as to who do I want to be right now? And I could be curious as to if this was the first moment of my life, what would I do? And so now I just have this vision really for the past week consistently of just like opening my eyes and just seeing my hands and being like, this is it. Like, this is life. Who do I want to be today? What do I want to do? So inner chatter is, I do have my I am statements, which again, my North Star, and I certainly say those every night. I say them every morning. Sometimes I say them at lunchtime. I definitely try to say them every night before bed. Even like I do it like a standing meditation with it. But sometimes even once I go to bed, if I'm having trouble sleeping, I'll just go into this thought process. I'm not saying it out loud, but I am thinking about exactly what my I am statements are. So I'm putting myself kind of into this theta, consciousness of thinking without thinking, right? It's just kind of a record of good things. So the inner chatter, as often as possible, is gratitude, compassion, love, intention, purpose, and curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity is always a
not
good
necessarily
one.
in that order.
Yeah. Well, what is the leisure and pleasure type state for you? I mean, is that all one and the same, or is it different?
Yeah, I mean, I love my backyard. It's funny, this pandemic, like at first we were in New Jersey, right outside New York City, we got hit pretty hard. And this is, everybody's on their own journey. And I don't want to say I felt bad because I don't feel bad, but I was in this space where, my wife works for a school district, so she's typically home during the summers. We have an amazing backyard. We have a pool. And so like, I love spending time back here. I can kick my kids out. Like when we were trapped here, I work from home. I was used to my wife being at home during the summers anyway. I'm used to having kids and being able to kick them outside. We're not trapped in a little, apartment in New York City or something like this. So I love spending time outside. I love listening to music. I know like part of my intention of who I want to be in this life is a great father, right? It's really very important to me. And so sometimes just watching them play, sometimes just spending time with them and asking them questions and being around them and teaching them in some capacity and learning from them in some capacity. Like sometimes that is my leisure, this is my pleasure. I can get trapped in like watching, YouTube. I can watch a ton of stuff on fish on YouTube going, all the way back to the 90s, late 80s. I love, I like having a good IPA and sitting on the porch and watching the sunset and smelling and seeing and feeling nature and listening to good music and, spending time with people I love and asking them about their lives. Obviously, when we could. I love going to see live music whenever I can. I have certain friends I definitely spend time with. Specifically, we go to shows as often as possible. I love connecting with people on things like this. I love discussing philosophy of life. I love being curious as to what this whole thing is about, and having deep conversations with people that can go there, that are not necessarily trapped in their own, what their parents told them or what we've been led to believe in some capacity, as much as they're just curious as to what else could be the answer. I think one of the most freeing things that ever happened to me is when I realized it's okay for me not to know. Like, what happens when you die? You know what? I don't know. And I'm 100%, and I'm really okay with that. Like, that's kind of the cool part. And that I don't have to know makes me just enjoy the now even more. I'm not sure how I got to death on at the end of Pleasure and Leisure.
We're all going there eventually, but no,
Exactly.
it's so true. But I mean, it's freeing, even when you're just thinking. I was thinking there when you're talking about it, to sort of say, well, death's there, and doesn't matter what doesn't, you don't need to know. I mean, that
Right.
very statement itself is freeing, because you're kind of going, all right, but what about no, I don't need to know. So
Yeah.
the statement's freeing, everything's freeing, because there's no energy given to it.
And it's, the other thing is, doesn't mean that I couldn't spend time being curious and discussing it and what the possibilities might be, but having any type of pressure or stress or anxiety because I don't know is different, right? So I don't need, to your point, I don't need to know. It's okay that I don't know. That's what opens us up to speculation and curiosity and like the love of the now, because there are limitless possibilities in everything. And when we judge anything, we put a label on anything, we've actually removed other possibilities. And the more we do that, the less we can enjoy the experience of life, because life is all possibility.
What about potential?
Say that again. Or I heard, so what about potential? What do you mean by that?
That's the question, in terms of, because you mentioned that life's full of, life's possibilities, but what about potential? Because I mean, I don't know whether I'm just thinking out loud, I suppose, in terms of whether it's push pull energy. Potential is what you could do, pleasure driven future opportunities, yada yada yada, versus possible, I could do that. I don't know. I mean, just in terms of potential, do you see yourself with infinite potential? Do you see yourself driven forward? How do you see it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So potential, thank you for that, because I see potential and possibility as the same thing, in the sense that there are limitless possibilities. So I have potential to hit any of the limitless possibilities. It's how much time and effort do I want to spend thinking and being.
Okay. Do you think then, I mean, as way back, we talked about a gift, do each one of us, are we applied with a gift and an individual gift?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're saying, does everybody have different potentials?
Yeah.
Right. Is probably, okay. So that is a different way for me to understand the question. So thank you. Yes, absolutely. And the truth is, though, with that, and from my experience anyway, I always say the truth is, but this is really just based on Ryan Stanley from 1975 to 2020. The truth is that everybody, most people, I should say, from my experience, know what their gifts are, whether they say it or want to acknowledge it or not. They know what they're good at and when they are in flow. They know when they are, maybe their true self is coming through. And they know what people acknowledge in them, and they know what makes other people recognize them, and they know what stands out to them. So when you know this about yourself, it's our responsibility to recognize what are the potentials based on that, right? So everybody's going to have different potentials, but everybody's going to have different experiences. As we said, everybody wants something different. So to say like, well, hey, my potential is that the same as Michael Jordan's potential? Of course not, right? I mean, could I be the best basketball player ever? No, right? I mean, I could, maybe, but no, I'm not, right? So I guess I'm, again, thinking out loud. So there's different types of potential, but I don't want to be the best basketball player ever because it doesn't align with me or my gifts. Now, if somebody, and I'm just, again, thinking about the concept, if somebody did want to be the best basketball player ever and they were a terrible basketball player, do they have the potential to be a better basketball player? Do they have the potential to be the best version of themselves? They have the potential to spend every moment thinking about basketball and playing the game as often as possible to be the best version of themselves in what their gift is and what they love the most, to a level where either A, they're going to play professionally in some capacity, may not be the best ever, but at the same time, be amongst the best ever, learn from the best ever, find other gifts that are within them because of their journey as they were seeking what they loved and felt passionate about. It's all part of the same process. And so, who's to say what everybody's journey is so unique, and the things that Michael Jordan did every single day, what he thought about every day. If you take it down to a quantum physics level, now we'll get really deep. Like, because Michael Jordan was so competitive and so deep in his mind, did his body change? Did his way of being physically change? Did the thoughts that he constantly had, and obviously physically put in the effort to practice, to exercise? I mean, you can even just see, I just watched his, I don't know what it was called, but there was a multi-part documentary on him. And you could see how he physically changed his body once he shifted gears. He wanted to reach a certain level. I'll go back for maybe once after he came back from taking a break and he was playing baseball or something. But the exercises he did changed. His body physically changed. And so our bodies will physically change if we think about what we want to think about and we focus our time, physical energy towards it. So, I mean, who's to, in the grand scheme of things, going back to the depth. Yeah, I mean, if our thoughts create things from a quantum physics level and have an effect on matter, including the matter that's in our body and all the matter that's around us, I mean, everybody's potential, I think, has to align with their gifts and their intentions and purpose, right? It is like this perfect storm of putting it all together and recognizing what feels good and what literally lights you up and what aligns with the soul of the song of your soul.
I love that. The song of your soul, I think, is so appropriate, and obviously from your point of view, the songs are quite thing.
And again, real quick, I just want to say that is definitely also a Dr. Joe thing. I don't want to come across as plagiarizing, stealing, hacking, because we've never met, but I consider him a mentor, and so I often do share a lot of his philosophies. But he like in one of these meditations, in the walking meditation, you are walking around and you are thinking, what is the song of your soul, so that the world can see it and hear it or whatever. And so it's a term, because to your point, I do love music. It does really speak to who I am. And so it comes out of my mouth often.
Talk to us about your book.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. So the book is called Be Patient, Be Present, Be Joyful, a first aid kit for the emotional bumps, scrapes, and bruises of life. And as I touched on earlier, I am not a reader. And so as a coach for 10 years, I was recognizing some pretty common themes in not only my clients, but in myself and my friends and my family. This feeling like life is happening to me. And so therefore I'm impatient because it's not happening the right way. And I want it to be different now. And this feeling of not being able to be present, because I feel like that's just something that gurus or monks do or whatever. And joy isn't something that is going to always happen, because life is happening to me. And I had some bad stuff happen to me and whatever. And so there's some basic things, and I'm not belittling anybody's experience, but I'm just saying that the basic concept of patience, presence, and joy were things I felt like, okay, if I can just have those three pillars as a place to start. Again, not being a reader, I am not going to read a book that's 300 pages long. If I'm having a stressful moment, if I'm feeling anxiety, I don't want to sit down and have to figure out how I'm going to read this whole entire book or even listen for 14 hours. So I wanted something that if I'm having a tough day, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling anxiety, that I can just pick up and read in 30 minutes and have some literal, physical, tangible takeaways. And so that's why the subconscious it's a first aid kit for the emotional bumps, scrapes, and bruises of life. So it's intentionally very short. There's 3 chapters. There's a prologue, there's 3 chapters, and there's an epilogue. And then the whole back of the book is called CPR. And it's just blurbs, just thoughts, just concepts that I've they came from my Instagram page. So just things that I just put out while I was thinking of them. While I was going through a bit of awakening, actually. There was certainly a specific amount of time that I remember where a lot of these came from. And so the prologue is called You Are a Creator. Because what I realized is that so many people, I really wanted to set up this book it's important for you to understand that we are always and in always creating something. Right now, you and I are creating 2 men recording an awesome podcast. By the way, I really want to thank you for today's conversation. I've been on 50 podcasts since June, and this is clearly easily top 5.
Thank you.
So thank you for having me, and thank you for the conversation. But anyway, we are always and in always creating something, right? So we're creating this. When you wake up in the morning, if you put on a blue socks, blue pants, blue shirt, blue hat, you're creating a man dressed in blue. When you put peanut butter on one piece of bread and jelly on the other, you put them together, you're creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I know that sounds obvious, but stay with me. We create conversation. We create art. We create laughter. We create music. If you write down a bunch of words on a piece of paper, you put a period at the end of it, you're creating a sentence. We also, unfortunately, create anger, and we create stress, and we create anxiety, and we create overwhelm. And I'm not belittling anybody's experience to say you should never be angry, you should never be sad, you should anything at all. I am saying that you are creating that, and that you are creating these emotions based on your thoughts. And so you're always creating something. Even when you go to sleep, when we go to sleep, we are creating someone who is sleeping, right? So literally, since the moment we are conceived, we're always creating something. And so that's the prologue. And then so chapter 1 is be patient. So if you are feeling impatient, we all know when we're impatient. If you're sitting in traffic and you're late for something, and you're angry and you're stressed and you're overwhelmed, you are creating a person who's impatient, right? So it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's not a good thing, but I'm saying it's just a fact. It's an observable fact from a detached perspective. And so if you were to say, what would it be like to create a person who's patient? How does patience feel? How could I create, how would I feel if I created patience in this moment? How would a patient person behave? And you were to be curious again, and you were to create patience and recognize that you have the ability to create patience by even asking yourself those questions. You were then creating a person who is patient. I'm not saying that this happens, first time, that's it. That's it. But actually the truth is it does happen with practice. Once you decide every moment I can create going back to with my children, I may react, but I don't need to spend the next 3 hours being angry at them. I can suddenly create a person who no longer wants to yell at their kids. And I can create a person, and I did, who no longer wants to hit their kids. And I can create a person who's deciding to be more curious as to what the lesson for them could be than someone who's angry at them for behaving like a 9-year-old. So we create patience. And so typically there's so much stress in life comes from impatience, from wanting to have something now, from wanting to be farther in life than we are now. I want to be further along in my career. I want to be in a better relationship. I want to have whatever these different things that we want. We often judge ourselves and we're impatient that we don't have them yet, right? So even on a long-term thing, we're constantly creating someone who's impatient, especially in a first world society where people have stuff on their phone. I got that email in a minute. When did I get this thing? Create a patient person because it's going to turn out the way it's supposed to. Doesn't mean don't follow up. It doesn't mean sit on your hands and do nothing. The opposite. Do what needs to be done. Your job as a co-creator, right? We touched on that, is to do the work, is to show up on purpose, but do it as a patient person. And I promise you'll enjoy it more. When you're no longer waiting for it to happen yesterday, instead you're creating it happening now and are then grateful and creating gratitude for your ability to create that, you enjoy it. So that's chapter 1. Now you're not waiting on anything anymore, right? You're not worried about the future. You're not late for anything. You're here. So then be here now. Create some presence. Create a present person. Typically, when we talk about the patience, but the other part of being present is we're worried not only about the future, but we're worried about the past. What did I say 2 weeks ago? What happened to me 10 years ago? What is someone somewhere else thinking about me right now? That is not being present. That is all being somewhere else. And I know I said it, but I'll say it again. When you realize that we are surrounded by life, there is oxygen, there is gravity, there is sunlight, there is water, all here so that you can exist right now. This moment right now is a gift. If you needed to, and you feel like I'm constantly thinking about anything else, anywhere else, you are not being here now. So what would it be like to create a present person? Again, get curious. How would a present person behave? What does a present person thinking about? Present person is thinking about what they're doing right now. And it might be to create a future that you want, but create who you are and want to be now as often as possible. So what am I feeling? Use your 5 senses. A great, great tip, right? Anybody who just wants to step into being present as often as possible. If you're feeling stressed, you're feeling overwhelmed, you can always create presence by being curious as to what your 5 senses are doing. What do I feel? What do I smell? What do I hear? What do I taste? Can I feel the air against the skin of my face? Can I smell the change of season? Can I look around and recognize that nature is literally beautiful and amazing and all these colors, and I have vision, and this is all a gift right now. All the stuff in my home and my office are reflections of life and things that I love. I've been grateful for those now. I can text somebody I love and just tell them I love them. Just send just a note encouraging them. Just letting you know I was thinking, right? All that is being here now and creating gratitude and love for life and helping others do the same. So now you've created a patient person. You've created a present person. Chapter 3, how would you rather be feeling? Joyful, right? If I'm going to be here, I'm going to be here now. I'm not worried about the past, not worried about the future. I want to be happy. Yes, I want to be happy. I want to experience life. And to be honest with you, the joy is like the shortest chapter in the book, because typically if you've spent time, if you've created patience, if you've created presence, joy is going to sneak up in there and be there anyway, because you recognize that it is a gift. There is a now. Life is a blessing. And so chapter 3 is about creating a joyful person. Pet a dog. Think about somebody you love unconditionally. Create joy. Stretch. If you think about a moment in your life that you loved, there was an experience that was joyful for you, think about it and be there for a moment. You're allowed to think about anything you want. So instead of thinking about the things that anger you or stress you or what someone else somewhere else thinks or said 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago, might say next week or tomorrow, be here now, be grateful for the now, create joy and love for life. It takes practice. You can be a novice at loving life. I was for a long time. But once you decide that you want to be a pro, it can be a pretty amazing experience. So, and then the epilogue is keep going, right? On your worst day and on your best day, use those 2 words. They will serve you always, because the only way you can get off your path is to not keep going. If you decide that you are still going, you are still going. You are in charge of your life. You are the author of your story. You get to decide what's next. And I understand, like, terrible things happen to people. Stressful things happen to people. Often, though, it's not that terrible, right? Everybody's had their share of traumatic experiences. And I've certainly had, I know I touched on that, but anyway. So I'm not belittling anybody saying that's just so easy, but I am saying keep going. And when you do keep going and you are seeking the lesson and you are choosing to be here as often as possible, you start to recognize, again, as I shared earlier, that now is all there ever is. And so if I'm keep going and I'm going towards my North Star, and that's what life is about. If I can do that and be the light that I want to see in the world at the same time, I'm living a purposeful life. And when I die, I will have done something. I've been something. It will have been something that I will look back on and say, thank you. And that's the book.
Awesome. I love it. I mean, I love the simplicity of it and the clarity of the message. It's that step by step, which I think makes total sense.
That's the thing. And then the other piece to it, and I'll share real quickly, since you gave me the opportunity. And again, thank you. It's tiny. It's small. It's nothing that you can literally put it in your back pocket. You can carry it with you wherever you go. You can put it in the glove compartment of your car. You can put it in your purse. And so while it was also made to read directly through, it's also literally made so you can, as a first aid kit, you can open it to any page and there will be something on there that serves you. Something like, so, oh my gosh, I don't have time to read. I don't even have 5 minutes to read a book, but I'm feeling overwhelmed. I just got out of a meeting with my boss. I have another meeting with my staff. I just need something right now. You can open this page and pick any page and it will serve you. In fact, real quick, if we could try an experiment, you pick a number between 1 and again, the book is 69 pages long, 69 pages of reading. Pick one number between 1 and 69.
14.
14. Now, unless it's like the chapter start, but who knows? So chapter 14 or page 14 says patience attract, and so there's a picture I'll just show everybody who can see us on YouTube. It's a Swahili proverb. And it says, patience attracts happiness. It brings near that which is far. Let me say it again because that was kind of sloppy. Patience attracts happiness. It brings near that which is far, which is a Swahili proverb. So, oh my God, okay. Something I can open, I can find. And then right across from that 15, it just says, choose to create who you want to be in this moment and create a you that is patient. So there's always something, and that's highlighted on the next page.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love the, again, it actually is attractive to the ADD, ADHD type mind, or whether if you go on that scale or if you go on just life's busy or whatever, I'm doing 50 things, but so I love the fact you can pick it up and run, that's awesome. So much to it. Couple of final questions. Favorite song with Fish?
It's a really tough one. And so this is not a final answer. And the cool thing about Fish is it might be different next week, right? Always. But I'll say Harry Hood would be a recommendation for anyone who's interested in checking out some Fish. But Harry Hood I say that because that was one of my first favorite songs live. That was my first earliest, one of my favorite concert experiences of all time was during that song. And I'll leave it at that because I could tell you I could have a couple other favorites for all different reasons. But so we'll go with Harry Hood.
I'll have to look it up.
Well, and really, actually, if you have 1 minute, I'll tell you the background of the story, the reason why it's called Harry Hood, and I'll make this as quick as possible because it's fun, and I'll give you just some insight because the lyrics are a little bit strange. The Fish, when they were in college, they rented this apartment from this guy named, their landlord was a guy named Mr. Miner. And there's a company in the U.S. called Hood Milk, spelled Hood, and it's a milk company. And they had their own little mascot or character, and his name was Harry Hood. And he was like this little guy in the commercials, and he'd be like there with the milk, and he was like a milkman. And so, like the lyrics in the song, it's mostly instrumental. Almost the entire song is instrumental. But the lyrics in the song are basically, "Thank you, Mr. Miner." And then, you can feel good about Hood, which was the slogan for Hood Milk. And then it was like, Harry, where do you go when the lights go out? And the reason that came to play is they were wondering where this little guy Harry went when the refrigerator door closed. When you close the refrigerator door, and then it went dark, where did Harry go? And so when you hear those lyrics, to understand, give some context. Thank you, Mr. Miner. Where do you go when the lights go out? And you can feel good about Hood is how they end the song. That's where it comes from.
It's like another version of What Does a Bear Do in the Woods, It's like...
Yes, exactly. Nobody knows except for the bear.
A whole different rabbit hole, Yeah. So, tell me, to summarize what your fire in the belly is in 1 or 2 words. What is, what is it for you?
I'm sorry. You said just at the beginning. My what?
In 1 or 2 words, what your fire in the belly is.
Be here now. I mean, really, it's all there is. And so I'm trying to keep it 1 or 2 words. That was 3. But be here now.
It's amazing how many people don't listen to that. They just
yeah. And then the other one I would say is 3 words again, but fear is a liar.
Strong, like it.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts?
Just gratitude for a great conversation. And no, that's it. That's all I got. Gratitude. Anybody else is listening, decide who you want to be today. Make some time to write it down. Literally, it could take you 5 minutes. It could take you 3 hours. This is your life. Don't live it for anybody else.
Beautiful. How can people track you down, hunt you down, stalk you?
Yeah. So RyanStanley.com is probably the quickest, easiest way. RyanStanley. Obviously, you can find my book on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever books are sold. But you can also buy it on my website. If you go to my website, RyanStanley.com, there will be a button that says "Be patient, be present, be joyful." If you click on that, you can buy the book there. If you do buy it from me, it will come with a signed copy. And then depending on my availability, it'll also come with a complimentary coaching session. And then obviously, if you're on social media, I am on Instagram, I am on Twitter, I am on Facebook. All the buttons will be on my page on RyanStanley.com. Pete, I'll send you like a couple links. You can put them in the show notes as well. But that's pretty much where I hang out the most.
Awesome.
Yeah, on YouTube, by the way. Oh, and I have and this will be on my website as well. There's an audio blog. So I podcast, but they're like 5 or 6 minutes long, right? So I just kind of do 5 to 7 minutes. It's just kind of me talking about thoughts and ideas. And so those are also on RyanStanley.com. But if you look up in any of your podcasting places, Stitcher or Apple or whatever, you can be patient. The name of the podcast is Be Patient, Be Present, Be Joyful as well.
Love it. Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing more from you soon.
Yeah, Pete. Thanks. You're the best.